giggling portrait. The house had settled around her in a way that old places did, slow and stubborn, as if it had to decide whether to accept her. Mara listened to it every night from the narrow bed in the back bedroom. The boards under the hallway runner popped at strange hours. The chimney exhaled with the wind. Somewhere in the walls, there was a sound like breath pulling through a straw. She told herself it was the drafty vents and the age of the place. Everything here was older than she was, right down to the oil stains in the garage. On her first morning in the village, she woke before the light came up. The air in the room was cold enough that her breath felt thick when she pushed the quilt back. Condensation filmed the inside of the tiny window and rattled faintly when she knocked it with a fingernail. The radiator under the sill stayed quiet. She had twisted the knob the night before until it would not go any further. Maybe the boiler was stubborn too. Mara pulled on an oversized sweater and wool socks, padded into the kitchen, and stood looking at the cabinets with their warped doors and rusty hinges. The clock on the wall had stopped long ago. Its hands paused somewhere between the hours, not quite honest about what time it had given up. Out here, time felt strange anyway. The village sat in a shallow bowl of land, ringed with low hills and woods that had once been logged out for the mill. The mill was shuttered now, its windows boarded and its smokestack just a tall brick finger nobody looked at. The last time she had driven through the main street, there had been more plywood than glass in the storefronts. She filled the dented kettle and set it on the electric coil. The burner ticked as it warmed. That was a sound she knew. The rest of it she had not grown used to yet. She had grown up here, but left young, on a bus that had smelled like vinyl and French fries. She had stayed gone until the call came about her aunt, the only relative she still had any words for. Stroke, the woman at the nursing home, had said. It came out flat, as if it were another kind of weather. The house had gone quiet when her aunt left it. Dust lay soft over the picture frames on the hallway shelf, the kind that made clean circles if you moved anything. Mara cleared those downstairs first. She worked by habit, the same rhythm she used in her clients' apartments in the city. Strip the bed, shake the sheets, get the washer going. Wipe, rinse, dry. A body moved easier when it knew what it was supposed to do. She had almost made it through the first day without remembering the attic. The pull cord hung in the hallway ceiling near the bathroom door. She had walked underneath it a dozen times that afternoon, carrying bags from the car, balancing a box of pantry staples on one hip. The cord brushed the top of her head once, just the lightest tickle, and she jerked away from it, hand coming up as if someone had smacked her. The box of cereal slid sideways and crunched against her ribs. She stood there a long moment, breathing a little too fast, and stared up at the small square hatch. The attic door had a smell in her memory. Dry heat baked into old wood, hot dust, the Swedish scent of mouse droppings under it all. Her aunt had kept trunks up there, and old curtains, and a heap of broken chairs she had always meant to fix. There was no reason for Mara to go up. The old woman at the law office had slid the key across to her and said, "The house is yours, dear. Take your time." No one had mentioned the attic. She told herself she was only curious. She went to the hall closet, took out the metal step stool, and popped it open under the hatch. The legs sank a little into the thin pile of the carpet runner. Her hand shook the first time she reached up. She gripped her wrist with her other hand and made herself try the cord again. It gave with a dry little groan. The hatch door came down an inch, then another, then dropped the rest of the way like a long exhale. The folding ladder inside unfolded itself with clacking joints and hung there crookily, one leg not quite reaching the floor. Warm air slid down the ladder and over her face. It smelled almost the same as she remembered, with an edge underneath, something like old varnish, and something else beneath that. A faint sweetness, like fruit gone soft in the back of a cupboard. She climbed anyway. The attic space had a low-sloped roof, the insulation packed tight between dark beams. A single naked bulb hung from the center, its cord looped around a hook to keep it from swinging. Light bled off it in a yellow circle that did not quite reach the far corners. The floor creaked under her weight, boards bowing in the middle. She was careful about where she put her feet. People broke ankles in places like this. There were the trunks, lids closed, their leather handles cracked. There were the broken chairs, neatly stacked now against the far wall, their backs pressed together like penitent shoulders. Sheets draped over a few unidentified shapes. The bulb hummed faintly. Dust motes turned slowly in the air, lazy like ash falling in water. The portrait hung on the far wall, partially hidden behind a garment bag. She saw the edge of the frame first, a slice of dark wood with a carved corner. Without thinking, she reached out and pushed the garment bag aside. It was larger than she remembered. The canvas took up most of the wall between two roof beams. The frame had a simple profile, nothing ornate, just enough depth to hold the canvas tight. The varnish had cracked along the corners, fine lines like the webbing in old hands. The subject was a girl seated in a straight-backed chair, hands folded in her lap. She wore a pale dress the color of skim milk and a small chain around her neck. Her hair was dark and blunt cut at the shoulders, her bangs too straight, as if someone with no practice had done it in a rush. The eyes were what held Mara. They were not wide, not overdone, not the dramatic saucers of bad portraiture. They were small and dark and set just a little close together. They looked directly at the viewer, the way some old religious paintings did. In the old story, the villager had said the eyes followed you across the room. As a child, Mara had crawled behind boxes to escape them. She remembered that part clearly. She took a breath and stepped sideways. The boards creaked under her, the noise so close to a human groan that she had the absurd thought of someone under the floor whispering for help. Her sweater brushed against a dust sheet, sending up a small cloud that made her cough. The girl's gaze moved with her. It was not a trick of the angle exactly. The painter had used that center line of the face, the way some eyes seem to watch from every point on a compass. But there was more than technique here. The eyes were too wet, too present. They did not belong in this dry air. They had that faint shine you saw in someone who had just been crying and had not wiped their cheeks. Mara shifted her weight, moved back across the room. The girl in the portrait turned with her, not in a clumsy wobble of paint and suggestion, but in a quiet, patient way. It was like watching a cat's pupils track a moving hand. She swallowed and looked away, telling herself she had known that would happen. That was the point of the story. The old men at the bar had told it the same way when she was small. The cursed portrait in the attic, the missing child, the whispers about a soul trapped in paint. It was a thing to scare wide-eyed kids on autumn nights when the power flickered. At the time, she had believed every word. Mara could have taken the portrait down. She could have pried the frame from the wall, kicked out the nails, hauled it down the ladder, and set it out by the curb on trash day. She could have driven it to the dump, leaned it up against a rusting refrigerator, and walked away. The thought flickered through her head as she stood in front of it. It should have landed like relief. Instead, there was an odd heaviness in her shoulders, as if someone had laid a hand there and pushed gently. The girl's mouth curved the smallest amount, a not quite smile. Mara narrowed her eyes. It was light. It was the angle. It was the way the varnish reflected the bulb. The features did not move. They only seemed to, the way a face on television changed when you walked past it in the dark. Still, she shifted her stance again, just to check. The mouth was straight now. Maybe it had always been straight. She did not want to stand up here any longer. She backed away, keeping her eyes on the portrait until she reached the ladder. The bulb buzzed a little louder for a second. That must have been the wiring. When she tugged the pull cord, the light cut out sharply, leaving the attic full of dim outlines. For a moment, some lighter shape hung where the portrait had been, a ghost of the frame in the dark. Her foot slipped on the top rung. She caught herself on the hatch frame, heart pounding against her thumbnail as it bent back. She shut the door, folded the ladder, and pushed the step stool back into the closet. Her hands left faint damp marks on the metal legs where her fingers had gripped too tight. That evening she almost laughed at herself. Almost. She made soup from a can and ate it at the small kitchen table. The light fixture above her hummed and rattled against its own screws when the wind blew. She listened to the local radio station, what was left of it. The signal came in grainy, with longer silences between songs than she was used to. When the announcer broke in with local news, his voice had the slow drawl of someone speaking over an empty room. Road crews, he said, would be closing the main highway in both directions for repairs. Heavy rain had undermined the shoulder near the bridge. Detours were in place, but drivers should expect delays. He reminded everyone about the advisory on the old mill lot. No trespassing. Unstable structures. There had been an incident last season. Kids in a pickup, too curious for their own good. The way he said it made the word incident do a lot of work. Mara sat there, spoon in hand, and thought about leaving. She had nowhere pressing to go. The city apartment still existed, but the rent was another mouth she did not want to feed. Her job had been the kind that did not wait for you. There were always more aides, more people willing to change linens and wipe faces and say gentle words for not enough money. Out here, money went further, even if there was little work. The house needed things, yes, but it was paid for. Her aunt had been careful that way. The attic could stay shut. She rinsed her bowl, wiped it with a faded dish towel, and hung the towel over the back of a chair. As she passed the stairway, she glanced up at the ceiling where the hatch lay flat and anonymous. It looked exactly like the rest of the plaster. You would never know where it opened, unless you already knew. That night, the wind picked up. Tree branches scraped the siding with a dry wooden racket. Somewhere in the wall, something loose tapped lightly, and then stopped and tapped again. The old furnace kicked in with a thud and a long sigh. The bedroom stayed cold. The radiator under the window ticked but never fully warmed. Mara lay there, wrapped in the quilt, and listened to the house breathing. She heard the giggle for the first time, just past the point where the night had gone too long to be called late and not yet started to count as morning. It was soft enough that she wondered if she had imagined it. It came from above, thin as steam through a crack in a pot lid. A quick, bubbling sound, not unkind exactly, but not right in this place. Her eyes snapped open in the dark. The ceiling above her was a flat gray sheet, brightening faintly where the streetlight down the hill leaked around the blind. She held her breath and listened harder. Her heart had a big, clumsy noise in her chest. It drowned out the house sounds for a moment. She waited until it calmed. The giggle came again, a little longer this time, like someone trying to hold a laugh in and failing. Her first thought was a television left on somewhere. Her aunt had liked late-night shows with canned laughter. The sounds bled through walls and commercials, and it had driven Mara crazy as a teenager. There was no television in the house now. Her own laptop sat shut on the kitchen table. No neighbors shared her walls. The nearest house sat across a narrow lane and behind a hedge. She told herself it was wind. The sound did not come again. She lay awake anyway, until the gray at the edges of the window brightened to something more like day. By then, the ceiling crack over the closet door had become a shape. A woman lying on her back with her arms folded, or maybe a river cutting through hills, depending on how she squinted. It did not look like a girl. It did not look like a face. She held on to that. In the morning, she made coffee that tasted faintly of metal and burned toast. She kept the radio off. The quiet had weight to it, but it was a familiar kind of weight. In the city, Quiet like this meant bad insulation and thin walls, but also meant no one talking to you, no one needing you. Here it meant the opposite. The silence had room inside it for small sounds to move around and grow teeth. She avoided the hallway at first. She moved from bedroom to bathroom to kitchen with a messy zigzag, like someone stepping around glass only they could see. Finally, she had to head for the front door. The hooks hung there, empty of coats now that the weather had warmed a little. Above them, the ceiling lay flat and white. Mara paused under the hatch, tilt of head involuntary, like a dog catching a new scent. The plaster looked the same as the night before. The outline of the door was faint, just a hairline shadow tracing the square. She listened. The only sound she heard was the faint rumble of a truck on the road down the hill. She unlocked the front door and stepped out into the yard. The village sat low in the land. The houses crouched close to one another, as if they knew the weather could turn, and they wanted to be near enough to help if something broke loose. The air smelled of wet soil and diesel. Overhead, the sky hung low and gray, like someone had pulled a sheet over the town. You could not see the hills today. They vanished into cloud not far past the last row of houses. She walked up to the small store near the crossroads. Its windows were streaked with old tape residue where signs had once hung. Inside, the floor had the stickiness of a mop that had moved mostly water and little soap. Shelves held canned goods and cereal, a narrow selection of bread, and a few plastic bins of vegetables that had wilted around the edges. A bell over the door gave a half-hearted ring when she went in. The woman behind the counter wore a sweater with the elbows worn glossy. Her hair was pulled back into a stub of a ponytail. She looked up at Mara with the frank curiosity of someone cataloging new arrivals in a place where no one new ever came without a reason. "You are Ida's girl," she said. She had that way of making a grown woman into a kid with a single phrase. Mara nodded. "Niece," she said. "I am staying at the house for a while." The woman nodded. Her gaze lingered a fraction too long, like she was waiting for Mara to offer more explanation. When none came, she gestured at the bread rack. "Deliveries have been spotty," she said. "Take what looks best, or at least what looks least bad." Mara took a loaf whose bag had only a little condensation, a jar of jam, and a small carton of eggs that rattled in a foreboding way. At the counter, she hesitated, then asked, "Do you know if the radiators in that house are temperamental?" The woman's mouth quirked. "They always were," she said. "House like that never stops being itself. You got the attic cleared yet?" The question landed with a small thud between them. Mara slid a bill onto the counter and kept her eyes on her change. "Not yet," she said. The woman's knuckles brushed hers as she handed the coins back. Her fingers were dry, skin roughened from bleach and paper receipts. "Some things are better left where they are," she said. Her tone stayed casual, but something in her eyes tightened. "You ask the old men down at the bar about that. They will talk your ear off. Ghost story weather, like this." Mara made a non-committal noise. If she let them, those old men would drag her back into every memory she had tried to leave behind. The bridge, the sirens, the way the town had pressed grief into ritual, then into habit, then into something else entirely. On the way back, she cut through the little square in front of the shuttered library. The maple trees there had been planted in a neat line, each with a metal grate around its trunk. The grates had filled with cigarette butts and wind-blown wrappers. There was a small plaque mounted on a rock near the center. The surface had gone dull with oxidation. The engraved words were still readable, though. "In memory of the lost," it said. Beneath that, a list of names. Her aunt's house and the attic portrait were tied to one of those names. The missing children had been the village's story once. People stopped telling it for a while, when it stopped feeling like something that had happened long ago and turned into something that might happen again. Enough time had passed now that it had become a cautionary tale told to other people as kids. Back home, she went through the motions of breakfast again. The toast burned. The eggs came out rubbery. The kettle screamed high and thin before she remembered to turn off the burner. Her thoughts kept wandering upstairs. She told herself she would take the portrait down. That was what a sane person would do. Find the frame, ease it off the nail, wrap it in an old sheet, and slide it behind the trunk. Out of sight, out of mind. The voice in her head that sounded too much like her aunt just made a small noise at that. It sounded like disapproval. Halfway up the attic ladder, she realized she had brought no tools, no sheet, nothing. Just herself in her sweater and socks, breathing into the warm dust. The bulb glowed steady when she pulled the cord. The attic looked exactly as it had before, with one difference. The portrait hung a little lower. It was half an inch, maybe less. The top of the frame no longer lined up with the beam the way it had. It sagged slightly to the right. A rational part of her brain said the nail had loosened. The wood had shifted. Houses moved as they settled. That was normal. The rest of her brain, still half fogged from the night, watched the girl's eyes and waited for a blink. The paint had a texture you could see from where she stood. The whites of the eyes were not pure. There were faint threads of blue and gray in them, like veins under pale skin. The pupils had been laid in with a darker pigment, rich and almost glossy. Whoever had painted this had known what they were doing. That should have been comforting. Good technique, nothing more. It was not. She stepped closer, watching for movement at the edges of her vision. The girl's hands were as troubling as her eyes. Thin fingers folded too neatly, knuckles a little too prominent. They looked like they belonged to someone who had sat up late night after night, clasping and unclasping them in her lap, waiting for something that did not come. Someone had once told a story about those hands. If you went up at night, if you stayed long enough with the light off, the hands moved first. They would uncurl from their perfect pose. One finger would lift, slow and stiff, and tap the frame from the inside. Just once. Just enough to let you know. Mara felt a little sick. The attic seemed to lean around her, the angled walls pushing in. Sweat formed along her hairline, even though the air up here felt cooler than downstairs. Her fingers twitched at her sides. "This is stupid," she said out loud, the sound of her own voice startling. It bounced off the low ceiling and came back thinner. The girl in the portrait watched her. The corners of her mouth were soft. Whatever expression lived there, it resisted naming. It was not sad, not quite, not pleased either. It looked a little like relief. Mara stepped back, bumping into a stack of chair legs. The clatter of wood on wood rang out too loud. Something scurried in the dark corner under the eaves. She swallowed and made herself turn around. The trick, she thought, was not to run. Running meant you believed there was something behind you. Calm steps down the ladder, one hand on the side rail, and then the door would close. She did not look back once on the way down. The hatch thudded into place above her. The vibration ran down the hallway wall and faded. For the rest of the day, she kept busy. She scrubbed the kitchen counters until the laminate showed faint circles where dishes had sat for years. She found an old rag rug in a closet, shook it out on the back stoop, and watched the dust scatter in the thin sun. She sorted her aunt's mail into piles, bills, catalogs, envelopes from charities with sad photos on them. She called the nursing home and then the lawyer and left messages on both machines. By the time the light outside dimmed, her shoulders ached in a good way. The kind of tired that came from doing things you could cross off a list. She ate cold leftovers and sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, cursor blinking in an empty search bar. She typed the village name first, then hesitated and added the words old portrait. The search suggestions that popped up were more about television shows and movies than real places. When she narrowed it with the name of the old missing girl, The internet came up with a few articles from regional papers, thin on detail and thick with speculation. No mention of a cursed painting. That part had stayed local, a story for bars and back porches, not for print. One article showed a black and white photo of a younger version of the village square. Kids in light jackets, grown-ups clustered behind them, a banner strung between two trees. The resolution was bad. The faces blurred when she zoomed in. Still, she could see one girl in the front row with dark hair and straight bangs, her eyes looking up and to the side, not at the camera. The expression on her face was hard to read. Mara closed the laptop. The giggle came earlier that night. She heard it before she had fully fallen asleep, when her body had gone heavy, but her mind still flickered with stray thoughts. It threaded through the noise of the radiator and the wind in the eaves, clear and bright and close. She sat straight up in bed. The room had that flattened look of dark, small and far away. Her throat felt dry. The hair on her arms prickled. "Hello," she said before she could stop herself. The word hung there a moment, stupid and small. No one answered. Of course, no one answered. The giggle did not repeat. She could picture exactly where it had come from, though. Not from the hallway, not from outside. It had come from directly over her bed, from somewhere in the thickness of the ceiling, maybe a little to the left. Right about where the attic floor would be. She lay back down slowly, pulled the quilt up higher, and stared at the crack over the closet door until patterns started to swim through it. At some point, her eyes closed. The next morning, she found footprints on the hallway runner. They were faint, just slightly darker ovals in the flattened nap of the cheap carpet. Bare feet, small. The toes were barely visible, like smudges from someone standing still too long. They started near the attic hatch, went a few paces toward the bedroom door, and then vanished with a light from the window hit the runner at a certain angle. Her first thought was that she had tracked something herself. Maybe she had gone barefoot to the bathroom in the night, stepped in spilled water, and left marks. She checked the bottoms of her feet in the bathroom light. They were pale and clean. No dirt, no household dust, no sticky patch where something had dried. She stood in the hallway in her robe, looking down at the prints until the skin between her shoulder blades prickled. They were too small to be hers, too narrow, the arch too high, the heel too tiny. They looked like a child's. All morning, every little sound set her off. The fridge compressor kicking on made her flinch. A truck downshifting on the hill sounded like a long exhale through clenched teeth. She dropped a mug and watched the handle shear off when it hit the sink. The ceramic broke with a clean, decisive snap. She stared at the pieces in her hands and thought of bone. By midday, the clouds had lowered so far that the tops of the trees vanished into them. The air had a metallic taste, like rain held its breath somewhere close. The radio station put out a weather update. Heavy storms expected, possible road closures. People were advised to stay home if they could. The word "stay home" stuck to her ribs like gristle. She found herself avoiding certain parts of the house without thinking about why. The hallway between the bedroom and bathroom, the spot under the attic hatch, the strip of floor where the little footprints had been. When she went past, she stepped wide, hugging the wall, as if she might disturb something by brushing up against it. In the afternoon, someone knocked on her door. The sound startled her so much that the book in her hand slipped and hit the floor flat, the clap of paper on wood too loud. She set it aside and went to the front hallway. The knock came again, more impatient this time. A man stood on the porch when she opened the door. He was tall in the way of men who had once been athletic and had gone to seed a little, jaw-shadowed, hair receding. He wore a department jacket from some nearby town, faded from too much wash. The badge on the chest was shiny, though. His eyes flicked over her face, then past her, into the dim hallway. "You must be Ida's niece," he said. There it was again. That way of making her into something smaller. She nodded. "Mara," she said. He introduced himself as Wade from the sheriff's office. His tone made it sound less official than it might have. Out here, sheriff's office meant a cramped building in the next town with a coffee maker that never quite came clean and a row of folding chairs for people waiting to be yelled at for their choices. "Just making the rounds," he said. "Weather like this, we check in on folks, especially the older ones." He glanced past her shoulder again. She could almost hear him realizing there was no older one here now. Just her. "I am fine," she said. "The house is drafty. That is all. You got heat?" he asked. The kind way he asked it made her want to snap at him. Just a little. "Mostly," she said. "The radiators are taking their time." He shifted his weight on the porch boards. His boots left small damp circles on the worn boards. "It has a reputation, this place," he said. She wanted to close the door. Instead, she leaned her hand against the frame and waited. "I grew up 2 streets over," he said. "The old story gets told and retold. You know it, I reckon." "About the portrait," she said. "About the attic," he agreed. "Kids dare each other to sneak up there on Halloween, that kind of thing. Mostly, they do not. Old stories hold more weight than they should." She thought of the footprints on the runner and kept her face still. "You believe in that kind of thing?" she asked. He made a face that suggested he did not want to commit either way. "I believe people do things when they are scared," he said. "And sometimes they need something to blame that is not themselves." Rain started in earnest while he stood there, fat drops hitting the edge of the porch roof, each one a small dim thud. The air between them cooled noticeably. He zipped his jacket halfway up. "There is a flood watch now for the low road by the bridge," he said. "If you need to get out, go the long way, just in case. And maybe stay out of your attic." He said the last part lightly, but the way his gaze snagged on the ceiling near the hallway made it sound more like advice than a joke. She nodded, feeling the outline of the hatch above her like a weight. After he left, the house felt smaller. The storm pressed against the windows like a big hand. Shadows thickened in the corners earlier than they should have. The lights flickered twice before settling into a faint, nervous hum. When the power went out completely, it took her a few seconds to realize it. She sat at the table staring at a word on the page that had blurred and shifted, unable to focus. The refrigerator's steady drone cut off mid-cycle. The overhead light went dark. The noise in the house changed all at once, like someone pulling a blanket off a cage. "Well," she said into the sudden quiet, "that figures." She found her aunt's candle stash in the bottom drawer by the stove. Thick pillar candles, half-burned, smelling faintly of vanilla. A bundle of thin tapers wrapped in newsprint. Matches in a plastic bag. She lit 2. Their small flames pushed back the dark in narrow cones. With no hum from the appliances, new sounds floated up. The tick of cooling metal in the stove. The faint scuttle of something in the walls. The storm's voice, louder now, rain drumming on the roof. Wind working its fingers into every crack in the siding. Somewhere above her, in the direction of the attic, a small muffled sound. She told herself it was a loose board adjusting to the pressure. The giggle came again. It slipped down between the beams, thin and bright and unmistakable. This time there was no way to write it off as a trick of a tired mind. It had a shape now, a rising arc like a tiny wave. It carried the quick exhale of someone who had just been surprised and found it funny. The flame of the nearest candle wavered. For a second, it thinned almost to nothing. Then it flared back, a little stronger than before. Mara closed her eyes and counted her breaths, a trick she had taught anxious clients. In for 4, out for 6. The numbers fell away as soon as she thought them. She replaced them with words. In, out, a soft chant in her head. She got up slowly. Her knees felt less reliable then she wanted them too. The candles threw big, jerky shadows of her moving body across the walls, as if someone else walked with her, a half step behind. She could stay downstairs. She could pull the quilt off the bed, bring it into the living room, and bundle herself on the couch with the candles and a book she would not read. She could wait out the storm and pretend she could not hear anything over the wind. The thought of leaving the attic door closed while something laughed up there made her stomach twist. By the time she realized she had made the decision, she already had the step stool out of the closet. Her hand found the cord on the first reach. The hatch came down with the same stiff groan. The ladder unfolded, its bottom rung hanging an inch above the hall carpet. When she climbed, the candle in her hand threw wild light up the narrow shaft, making the edges of the opening look like a mouth. Warm air met her face. It smelled heavier now, less like old dust, more like something lived in recently. There was a faint sweetness that made her think of a room where a child had been sick, the cloying scent of cough syrup and sweat. The attic looked different by candlelight. The electric bulb, useless now, hung dull and lifeless, cord dangling. The circle of light from the candle wobbled as her hand trembled. It caught the tips of the chair legs stacked in their corner, the edge of a trunk with a missing handle, the curve of a lampshade. Shadows pooled in the spaces between. The portrait glowed. The paint seemed to hold light in a strange way. The girl's face caught the candle glow, cheeks gilded, eyes deep. The dark of her hair blurred into the darker wall behind her. The dress gleamed faintly. It was not a bright effect. It was subtle, like seeing something just past the corner of your eye and realizing it had moved without you turning. The girl's eyes were no longer looking straight ahead. They were angled down slightly, focused not on the far wall opposite, but on Mara herself. There was no mistaking it. The pupils seemed to have shifted, the whites showing more at the top. It made the gaze feel more intent, more personal. Mara's mouth went dry. Her tongue felt too big. She swallowed and took another step forward. The candlelight caught the varnish on the canvas and made the sheen dance across the surface. The girl's lips were parted a fraction now, just enough to see a hint of teeth. It was more expression than the painting had ever had before. "You are not real," Mara said. Her voice sounded thin to her own ears. The girl in the portrait did not answer. Of course she did not answer. The attic held the soft patter of rain on the roof and the small sounds of the house settling. Somewhere near the eaves, something scratched and stopped. Mara stood there for what felt like a long time, breathing in air that did not feel like it belonged in her lungs. The giggle did not come again. Instead, there was a faint whisper at the edge of hearing, like fabric shifting or someone turning over in bed. It seemed to come from behind the canvas. Against her better judgment, she reached out. Her fingertips touched the lower edge of the frame. The wood was cool and slightly tacky, as if someone had wiped it down with a damp cloth not long ago. It did not feel like it should, dry and dusty, untouched for years. The sensation sent a small electric shock up her arm. The girl's eyes widened. It could have been the candle. It could have been the way the flame flickered when her hand shook. Whatever the cause, in that moment, it looked like the painted girl had taken a small breath in. The skin at the bridge of her nose creased, as if she were about to speak. Mara jerked her hand back. The candle flame guttered. Wax slopped over the side and dripped hot on her knuckles. The pain pulled a sharp hiss from her. Something tapped on the inside of the canvas. It was a tiny sound, almost lost under the drum of the rain. A little, hollow, wood-on-wood tap, like a fingernail on a table. Just once. Mara stumbled backward. The candle nearly went out completely. She caught herself on the edge of a trunk and clutched it until her breath slowed. Her pulse raced hard enough that she could feel it in her ears. Calm, she told herself. It was a word, not a feeling. She did not remember climbing down. Her body must have done it on its own, following the pattern it had learned. One rung, then another. The candle made it downstairs with her, still burning, stubby, and dripping. She spent the rest of the night on the couch after all, quilt wrapped around her shoulders, the candle on the coffee table. The house's noises shifted gradually as the storm moved on. The rain eased to a steady patter, then to intermittent drips. The wind softened. The power did not come back. The refrigerator stayed mute, its silence a constant reminder of how much the house had depended on its hum. She dozed in snatches. Every time her head tipped forward, she jerked awake, convinced she had heard something. A footstep on the attic floor. A soft, pleased sigh. A small, sleepy laugh. At some point, she realized the giggle was not coming from above anymore. It was closer. Quieter, too, as if whoever made it had moved to stand just behind a door, hand over their mouth. The sound seemed to ride the current of air in the room, a faint ripple that brushed against her ear. When pale light finally filtered around the edges of the curtains, she felt like she had swallowed a handful of dust. Her eyes burned. The candle was a puddle of wax with a short, stubborn wick still glowing. The power flickered back with a pop. The overhead light came on too bright. The refrigerator roared back to life, the sudden noise like a small explosion. It made her jump. She blew out the candle, watched the thin thread of smoke curl upward, and tried to convince herself that everything would go back to the way it had been before the storm. Houses made strange noises, especially old ones. Paintings did not move. Footsteps in the hall came from bad carpet and old shadows. In the bathroom mirror, her face looked older than she expected. There were faint smudges under her eyes, a shallow cut on her hand from where she had scraped it on the trunk. When she turned her head to one side to examine it, for a heartbeat she thought she saw another reflection over her shoulder. Small, dark hair, pale dress. When she spun around, the bathroom door stood open on the quiet hallway. The hatch in the ceiling looked innocent, as always. She lasted until midday before she gave up and walked down to the bar. It was not open officially. They never really were, unless there was a sports game someone cared about. The front door was unlocked anyway. Inside, the air smelled of old beer and fryer grease. The overhead lights were off. Daylight slanted in through the front windows, catching dust. There were 3 men at the far end of the bar, their hunched backs forming a short row. One of them turned when she came in and gave a gruff nod. The bartender, a square woman with tattooed forearms, raised her eyebrows. "We are short on customers lately," the woman said. "You come to help with that?" Mara sat on a stool halfway down and ordered a soda. She drank it too fast, the cold fizz making her teeth ache. The bartender watched her a moment, then leaned her elbows on the polished wood. "Ida's niece," she said. Mara swallowed, tried to smile. The bartender introduced herself as Tessa. The old men muttered in their corner, the sound like low radio static. "You up at the house alone?" Tessa asked. "For now," Mara said. "I am sorting through things." Tessa nodded slowly. Her eyes drifted up, as if she could see through the ceiling to the attic. "I heard the crew pulled a kid out of that place once," she said. "Long time ago. Not alive, I mean. Not the first one either." She tipped the soda gun into a glass, let the foam settle. Mara's fingers tightened around her own glass. The condensation made the skin of her palm slick. "People tell that story different ways," Tessa went on. "Some say the kid went up there on a dare. Some say she lived there, hiding after a bad thing at home. All agree on one thing. The last sound anybody heard was laughing." Mara's heart skipped in her chest. Her tongue felt heavy. She told herself not to ask, but the question scraped its way out anyway. "You ever hear it?" She asked. The bar seemed to get quieter. The old men stopped their mutter for a second, then started it up again, louder, as if to cover the gap. "Heard a lot of things in this town," Tessa said. You want to stay sane? You learn which ones to ignore. She slid a bowl of peanuts toward Mara. Her gaze was sharp, though, too focused to match her casual tone. If you hear anything you cannot ignore, you come back and tell me. You do not go looking for it alone. On the way back home, Mara took the long way, skirting the low road by the river. The water had risen high, tugging at branches and discarded tires stuck along the bank. Mud clung to the grass near the edge in sloppy tongues. There were yellow warning sawhorses by the bridge, the road beyond them slick and empty. The sky had cleared some. Sunlight broke through in weak streaks, turning puddles into shallow mirrors. Her reflection in one of them looked stretched and pale. When she moved, there was a tiny lag, as if the water image took a fraction of a second to catch up. She got back to the house in late afternoon. The front yard was soft underfoot, the soil saturated. Her shoes left dark prints on the porch. Inside, the air smelled faintly of spent candles and something else she could not place. A sour-sweet note, the tail end of a child's perfume maybe, or the inside of an old toy chest. As she hung her coat, she noticed the hallway runner was no longer straight. It had shifted a little off-center, one edge curling up as if someone had dragged their foot along it. When she bent to smooth it, she saw new footprints. They overlapped the old ones, but were more distinct now. The toes were clearer, the heel more defined. They started right where the attic ladder would touch down, then ran straight toward her bedroom doorway. There were more of them this time. The last set ended just at the threshold to her room, the toes pointing inward. She straightened slowly, the runner's fabric soft under her palm. Her breath came shallow. The house creaked around her, innocent and arthritic. She did not sleep in the bedroom that night. She made up the couch again, drawn curtains tight. A small lamp near the corner stayed on. The light was dim, but it was something. She lay on her side facing the wall, trying not to imagine anyone standing behind her. The giggle did not come. The silence was worse. Around the hour when she had first heard it the night before, the house seemed to hold its breath. The refrigerator stopped humming mid-cycle again, as if the power were thinking about leaving. The radiator pipes gave a small, tired sigh. The air in the room cooled slightly, as if someone had opened a window she could not see. Her skin prickled. She rolled onto her back and stared at the ceiling. A faint shadow on the plaster above her shifted. Just a trick of light, she told herself, the lamp's bulb wobbling on its stem. Her eyes dry from staring too long. The shadow moved again, this time with more intention. A small, rounded shape detached from the rest. It stretched slowly, the way someone might if they had been cramped too long in a narrow place. A hand shape, she thought wildly, fingers sliding along the underside of the ceiling before withdrawing. Her breath came in a sharp gasp. The sound was too loud in the quiet room. "Stop," she whispered, not sure who she was talking to. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, very softly, through the thin drywall between the living room and the hall, she heard a series of small taps. Light, rhythmic. Footsteps. They moved from the bedroom doorway down the hall, then stopped directly on the other side of the wall from where she lay. She could picture them. Bare feet, pale soles, toes curling against the old wood under the runner. Whoever stood there did not seem to breathe. Mara shut her eyes. She lay as still as she could, as if movement might draw attention. Her own heartbeat thudded in her ears. Gradually, the air warmed a little. The refrigerator kicked back on. The house resumed its normal nocturnal chorus. She did not open her eyes again until light slid around the curtain edges. In the morning, she found a small smudge on the living room wall, a faint grayish mark at about the height of her shoulder. When she looked closer, she saw the shallow curve of four-finger shapes and the absence where a fifth should be. Her stomach dropped. Her aunt had told that part of the story once. The woman who had posed for the original painting, the girl's mother or aunt or some distant relation, had lost a finger in an accident with a laundry wringer. The painter had left it out of the portrait, too honest to pretend it had not happened. The hand in the painting had 4 fingers on one side, 5 on the other. The smudge on the wall matched that story perfectly. 4 touches, 1 absence. As if someone with that hand shape had paused there, resting before moving on. The mark came off with a damp cloth. The paint on the wall underneath looked slightly cleaner, a fresh square in the dingy stretch. She stood back and tried to tell herself it proved nothing. A scuff from moving furniture, perhaps. An old stain she had not noticed in that light. Her reflection in the hallway mirror did not look convinced. She turned away from it, days blurred. The weather settled into a gray rhythm. Some mornings there was fog so thick she could not see the neighbor's hedge. Other days, flat rain. On one rare clear afternoon, sunlight cut across the attic window, and she could see dust glittering inside like a shaken snow globe. She tried not to think about the portrait. She lasted until she had to go upstairs for something practical. Winter blankets, an extra lamp, boxes of sweaters. Each time she told herself she would only reach the edge of the attic, not go all the way across. Her eyes always found the canvas anyway. The girl's expression changed, little by little. It was nothing you could point to in a photograph. If someone had taken a picture on the first day, and another a week later, and laid them side by side, they might have seen nothing different. In person, though, the shifts were clear. The eyes seemed brighter now, the skin less flat. The shadows at the corners of her mouth softened. The little chain at her throat looked more distinct, each link catching light in a way it had not before. The hands folded in her lap were the last to change. The fingers seemed to loosen over time, not quite moving, but relaxing a fraction. It made the pose look less stiff, more alive. Mara stopped turning the attic light off when she left. It felt like leaving a night light on in a child's room. The bulb's low hum followed her down the ladder. At night, a faint sliver of yellow leaked around the edges of the hatch, so dim you had to stand in the dark hallway and squint to see it. She did that more than once. Stand there, eyes upward, pulse too loud. The giggle came now and then, always soft, always brief. It was not the cruel sound she had remembered from childhood stories. It was almost playful. When the call came from the lawyer, telling her there was a buyer interested in the house if she ever wanted to sell, she found herself saying she was not sure yet. The woman on the phone sounded surprised. For some people, leaving would have been an easy choice. Back to the city, back to noise, to anonymity, to work that paid if not well, then at least predictably. Here she had a house full of ghosts, real or imagined. Here she had a portrait that seemed to watch her every move. The thought of leaving it behind made something twist inside her. Guilt, maybe, or something like responsibility. That night, she stood at the bottom of the attic ladder longer than usual before climbing. She told herself she had something to say. It felt ridiculous, but the feeling would not go away. She could have spoken in the hallway, where the ceiling kept a polite distance. Instead, she went all the way up, candle in hand again, even though the bulb still worked. The attic light made things flat. Candlelight made them seem honest. The portrait gleamed in its little pool of fire. The girl's eyes tracked her as she came closer. There was no point pretending otherwise. The sense of being seen had deepened. It did not feel malicious exactly. Watchful, yes. Expectant, maybe. "You cannot stay," Mara said. Her voice shook a little. It sounded strange in the low space. Too loud, then smaller than she wanted. That is not how this works. She was talking to canvas and pigment. She knew that. At the same time, she talked to something else, something that lived in the way. Her skin prickled when she crossed the hall at night in the shape of footprints and smudged fingerprints and laughter that came from empty air. The girl's painted lips were parted a fraction more. In the wavering light, the gleam on her teeth looked wet. "What do you want?" Mara asked. The question slipped out, sounding more desperate than she liked. The attic answered with the tick of the cooling roof and the faint scratch of some animal in the wall. Under that, if she listened too hard, she almost heard whispering, not words, just the soft sound of a mouth moving. A blot of wax slid down the candle and pooled at her knuckles. It burned. She came back to herself with a jerk. The portrait loomed in front of her, the girl's eyes too close, too present. She stepped back quickly, heel catching on a loose board. The attic floor tilted. Her arm shot out, hand scrambling for balance. Her palm slammed flat against the canvas. For a split second, she expected fabric. Dry, rough, resisting. Instead, she felt something else. It was not skin, not exactly, but it was not inert cloth either. It gave under her hand a fraction, like touching the surface of water held very tightly in a bowl. There was a sensation of coolness, of something deep behind that surface, pulling. A sound hit her then, not just in her ears but all through her chest. A long, ragged inhale, as if someone who had been holding their breath for a very long time had finally let it go. The giggle that followed started small and then broke into something larger, almost a sob. Mara yanked her hand back. Her fingers came away tingling. For an instant, as the candle flame flared high and then settled, she saw her own handprint on the painted dress. 5 pale marks pressed into the paint. The outline faded slowly, sinking back into the color until it was gone. The girl in the portrait was smiling now. It was a full smile, teeth showing, cheeks lifted. It transformed her face, made it look almost kind. The eyes shone, bright and wet. The hands in her lap had unfurled. One rested now on the arm of the chair, fingers relaxed. Mara stumbled backward. Her heel found the ladder opening. For a wild moment she thought she would fall. Her hand caught the frame at the last second. Wood dug into her palm, real and solid and ordinary. She fled. The candle went out in the rush of air as she pelted down the ladder. Darkness swallowed the attic. The hatch swung shut harder than she meant to, the sound ringing down the hallway. She stood there, chest heaving, hand on the cord, as if she could hold the door closed by sheer will. It did not move. Of course, it did not move. She laughed, a thin, high sound she barely recognized as her own. The rest of the night came in fragments. She phoned Tessa at the bar, got the machine. She started a message, saying her name, then heard herself trail off. What was she going to say? The painting moved. A child laughed. I touched it, and it felt alive. She hung up without leaving a full thought. She paced the kitchen. She put her hand under the tap and ran cold water over it until the tingling faded. When she stopped, she realized her skin looked different. Not marked exactly, but paler around the fingers, as if blood had been pulled away, then returned slowly. She thought about leaving, pulling a coat on over her thin shirt, grabbing her keys, and driving until she found a motel with a buzzing sign and walls thin enough that other people. Sleep could keep her company. The roads might be clear enough by now. The floodwatch sawhorses would still be there, but the long way out of town would be open. Her hand went to the hook where her keys hung. She touched the ring, felt the cool metal against her fingertips, and did not take it down. The idea of the house sitting empty, hatch closed, attic dark, portrait alone, made something in her chest twist. The feeling was not exactly fear, not exactly pity. It was some uneasy blend. The girl in the painting had smiled at her. It had not felt like a threat. It had felt like recognition. By dawn, she knew she was not going anywhere. When the phone rang mid-morning, she jumped hard enough that her coffee slopped over the rim of the mug. A voice on the other end belonged to the nursing home, checking on billing. The world outside still turned on its slow, grinding wheels. After she hung up, the house felt different. Lighter, in a way that made her more uneasy, not less. The air seemed to move more freely. The smell she had not been able to name before, that faint sweet note, was stronger now. It made the back of her throat prickle, as if she had swallowed too much sugar. She went to the hallway and looked up at the hatch. The outline of light around it was gone. She had not turned the attic bulb back on after fleeing. The square of plaster sat dull and flush with the rest of the ceiling. She stood there a long moment, hand hovering under the pull cord. A small, soft tap came from above. One tap, then another. The rhythm was not urgent. It was patient. The sound of someone waiting, confident you would eventually give in. Mara closed her fingers around the cord and pulled. The attic was brighter this time. Light poured in from the small end window. The day outside had cleared. Sunlight crossed the floor in a wide band, turning dust into shifting stars. The bulb's yellow circle layered over it. The air up here was warmer than before, almost comfortable. The portrait was empty. The frame still hung on the wall, heavy and solid. The canvas remained stretched within it, but the painted image was gone. No girl, no chair, no folds of pale dress. Only a faint discoloration where color had once been, the suggestion of shapes like the memory of clouds after you close your eyes. For a moment, Mara thought she was looking at the wrong wall. She turned in a slow circle, candle still in hand, though she did not need it. Trunks, chairs, boxes, the swinging cord of the bulb. The window, dusty but bright. No other paintings. Her gaze snapped back to the frame. Her heart beat high in her throat, making it hard to swallow. The canvas itself was not blank. Up close, she could see marks on it. Not brushstrokes, not the deliberate patterns of paint laid by a hand, but smears and streaks, as if something had been pressed against the surface from the inside and dragged. Pale shapes that might have been fingers. The faint arc of what could have been a shoulder, turning away. It looked less like an unfinished painting than like a door someone had slipped through in a hurry and forgotten to close. A sound came from behind her. Light, bare feet on wood, the tiny scuff of skin against board. Each step measured and calm. She did not want to turn. Every nerve in her body screamed not to. Her muscles locked for a heartbeat, then another. When she finally moved, the motion was slow and jerky, like a puppet pulled on tangled strings. A girl stood near the attic ladder. She was shorter than the painted version had been, or maybe that was just the difference between canvas and air. Her hair was dark and blunt cut at the shoulders, bangs too straight. She wore a pale dress that might once have been white. It was stained now with the soft gray of old fabric left in trunks too long. A small chain circled her neck, its pendant tucked out of sight. Her skin had the flatness of someone who had not seen sun in a long time, not pallid in a horror story sense, just dull, colorless in a way that made her seem more like a reflection than a person. Her eyes, though, were bright. Dark irises, large pupils, gaze fixed on Mara with quiet intensity. She was smiling. It was the same smile that had spread across the portrait's face in candlelight. Small, almost shy, teeth just showing. There was something else in it now, too. Relief. Mara's throat worked. No sound came out. The girl took one step forward. Her bare foot made no noise on the floor. The dust did not puff under her toes. She did not cast much of a shadow. The sunlight from the end window went through her in a way that was not quite transparent, but close. The edge of her figure blurred at the shoulders, like an image on a screen with bad reception. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was soft, high but not shrill. It sounded like any child in the village might. There was a faint echo to it, as if it came from a little way down a hallway. Mara found her own voice somewhere. "For what?" she asked. The girl tilted her head, as if considering. "For opening the door," she said. Her gaze flicked to the frame on the wall, then back. There was no malice in it. There was something like curiosity. Her eyes tracked every small movement of Mara's hands, the rise and fall of her chest. "You were stuck?" Mara asked. The question felt ridiculous as soon as she said it, but the girl answered without hesitation. "Yes," she said. A pause. It was dark. Mara swallowed. The attic was bright now, the sun making patterns on the floor. Still, she could imagine sitting years upon years inside the world of that painting. A frozen lap, folded hands, gaze fixed forward, unable to blink. The thought made her stomach clench. "You can go now," Mara said. The words came out more like a question. The smile on the girl's face thinned. Her eyes flicked sideways to the narrow attic window. Outside, the sky spread wide and pale. The girl took another step forward. She lifted one hand, the one missing a finger, and reached toward Mara's arm. Her fingertips brushed Mara's sleeve. The sensation was like stepping into cold water up to the wrist. Not painful, startling. "I could," the girl said. Her tone was mild. "Or I could stay." The attic seemed to lean in around them. The air felt denser. Downstairs, faintly, the refrigerator hummed and the radiator ticked. The ordinary life of the house went on, indifferent to whatever choice was being weighed up here. "Why would you stay?" Mara asked. Her voice broke on the last word. The girl's expression did not change. Her hand dropped back to her side. "I like it here," she said. Her gaze slid past Mara, down through the floor, the hall, the bedroom, the kitchen table with its chipped mug, the couch with its rumpled quilt, the patterns of another person's days laid out like a game board. "It is not yours," Mara said. The words felt small, even as she spoke them. The girl's eyes flicked back to her. Something moved in them, some flicker of sadness or annoyance. Difficult to tell. "Not yet," she said. The giggle came then, bubbling up from her chest. It sounded almost exactly like it had through the ceiling. Close now, personal. Mara took a step back, then another. Her heel hit the top rung of the ladder opening. She glanced down, saw the empty shaft, and gripped the side rail. "You should go," she said, not sure if she was talking to herself or the girl. The girl did not follow her to the ladder. She stayed near the center of the attic, head tilted, watching. Her bare feet did not disturb the dust. Her dress did not stir in the faint draft from the hatch. She looked every bit like a thing that belonged in old stories, the kind whispered in bars on bad weather nights. "I will," the girl said. Eventually, the words followed Mara down, soft and steady. Her foot slipped on one rung, caught on the next. The candles she had forgotten, she held clattered and bounced, leaving little streaks of wax on the metal. At the bottom, she shoved the ladder up harder than she meant to. The hatch slammed shut, the sound sharp enough to make her flinch. The square of plaster looked ordinary when it settled back into place. No bulge, no shadow, no sign that anyone stood on the other side listening. Days went strange after that. The village kept on. The mail came. The radio played songs that crackled with static. Tessa at the bar asked, "You all right?" in a tone that suggested she did not want the real answer. Wade from the sheriff's office drove by in his cruiser, now and then, slowing near the house, eyes flicking up toward the roofline. Inside, the house shifted. The little footprints on the hallway runner appeared more often. Sometimes they pointed toward the bedroom, sometimes toward the kitchen. Once she found them circling the couch, as if someone had walked around it again and again while she slept there. Objects moved, small things at first. A mug she knew she had left in the sink stood clean and dry on the counter. A worn dish towel she had hung on the chair back lay folded on the table instead. A book she had been reading was open to a different page. one with a sentence underlined in pencil she was certain she had not marked. Sometimes she woke with the feeling of weight against the side of the couch, as if someone had leaned against it from the hallway and listened to her breathing. The giggle came and went. Sometimes it disappeared for nights, leaving a hush that seemed to press on her eardrums. When it returned, it came from closer than before. Once, half awake and turned toward the back of the couch, she felt a small burst of warm air against the shell of her ear, like someone had leaned in to share a secret. She never went back into the attic. She thought about it often. The frame up there, empty now, the canvas marked only with the traces of something having passed through. The girl's last expression, the way she had watched, weighing possibilities, the way she had said, "Not yet." There were choices to be made, she knew. Sell the house and run. Bring in someone else, some priest or counselor or self-proclaimed expert with a box of tricks. Pretend none of this had happened. Tell herself she had been lonely and tired and listening too hard to the noises of an old place. Instead, she fell into a pattern. She woke. She made coffee. She listened to the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the radiators. She walked carefully around the places where footprints tended to appear. She said little things out loud into the quiet, at first half as a joke. "I am making toast now," she would announce in the kitchen. Or, "I am going out for a bit. Do not move anything important." There was no answer. Sometimes after she spoke, though, the house felt less oppressive. The silence between its sounds stretched differently, warmer, somehow. At night, she slept on the couch more than in the bed. On the nights she tried the bedroom, she woke with the sense of being watched from above. The crack in the ceiling over the closet door had shifted shape. Sometimes it looked like a river, sometimes a hand, sometimes a mouth. The girl's presence threaded through her days like a subtle scent. Not constant, not overwhelming, just there. The faint sweet note in a drawer she opened, the gentle impression of weight on the edge of the couch, the soft breath of a giggle when nothing particularly funny had happened. Mara found herself speaking to that presence more. Little things. Comments about the weather. Complaints about the radio. Memories of the aunt who had once owned this house, of the train that took her away the first time she left, of the city smells she did not miss. "You would have liked the city," she said once, standing at the sink watching the streetlight come on. "Or maybe you would have hated it." A giggle that came then sounded almost fond. It took her a while to notice she was sleeping better. The nights of staring at the ceiling until dawn grew fewer. Sometimes she woke in the gray morning with a distinct impression she had dreamed of a girl sitting at the foot of the couch, swinging her feet and humming tunelessly. The dreams were not frightening, just odd. She caught her reflection in the hallway mirror one day and did not recognize the expression on her own face at first. It was something like contentment, wary, yes, but settled in a way she had not been even in the city, surrounded by noise and people. She did not mention any of this to Tessa or to Wade. She did not answer the lawyer's follow-up calls about selling. The house was hers. So was whatever came with it. One evening when the sky outside had gone the color of old bruises, there was a knock at the door. The sound had the same firm cadence as before. She opened the door to find Wade on the porch again, collar turned up against the damp air. He looked past her shoulder, frown lines deepening. "Just checking in," he said. "There have been reports of someone wandering around at night. Folks hearing things they cannot place." Mara's heart jumped. She had heard footsteps, too. Soft ones, bare. She clenched her hand around the edge of the door and forced a smile. "Just the house settling," she said. "That's so," he said. His gaze dropped to the hallway runner behind her. The faint outline of a small footprint showed in the nap, more distinct than usual. He stared at a half-second too long, then looked back up at her. "You sure you are all right up there on your own?" he asked. She hesitated. The answer that wanted to come out first was no. The word snagged on something else, though. The memory of the girl's hand brushing her sleeve. The relief in that soft thank you. A way the house's silence had changed shape. "I am not on my own," she said before she could edit herself. Then quickly, I am fine, getting used to it. He studied her face for a long moment. Whatever he saw there made him back off a centimeter. He nodded slowly. "You know where we are if you need us," he said. "Storm season is not done yet. Old houses have a way of showing their age." After he drove away, the house seemed to relax around her, as if some held breath had finally been let out. The refrigerator hummed contentedly. The radiator pipes clicked in a gentle rhythm. From the corner of the living room, near the edge of the couch, came a small sound. Not quite a laugh this time. Something closer to a sigh. Mara sat down, back to the room, and pulled the quilt over her legs. She looked at the blank television screen, saw her reflection there, and behind it, for just a second, the faint outline of a girl in a pale dress. The girl lifted her hand in a small wave. Not yet, Mara thought. Not gone. Not leaving. She did not wave back. She sat very still, listening to the house breathe, while somewhere behind her a soft giggle curled through the air and settled into the walls, as quiet and permanent as a brushstroke dried under varnish.